edit that out. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Molten Truth. I am your host, Zoe Michaels. You can find information about me on zoemichaels.com and on my Facebook page. Today we are here with Pat Black-Gould, and I'm probably saying that wrong. If so, I apologize.
It's okay.
Gould. See, I knew I'd probably be saying that wrong.
Everyone does it.
I appreciate that. So, Pat has a book called All the Broken Angels. And I have to admit, I haven't read it yet. I'll have to put it on my to-do list. But I found her interesting just in our brief getting to know each other session because she has history as a psychologist. She has background with families that was in the war, and working with veterans as a psychologist was I think, one of her specialties. So I'm going to stop talking and let Pat, who knows all about Pat, share her story with us, and then we will all get to know her together. Pat, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All the Broken Angels, it's a novel that I co-authored with Steve Hardiman, and it's pretty much semi-autobiographical. And it covers two children that are growing up, starting out in the late 1950s, when there were social norms that were fairly just quiet and reserved. And then the 60s happened, and color just blossomed, and liberation and freedom and war all merged at the exact same time. And the two cousins who were very close find themselves taking different paths in life. He's gung-ho G.I. Joe, and Kate doesn't have a problem with his being in the military, but it just happens to be a war she doesn't agree with. So they have a divide, of both a political divide and a social divide and a cultural divide. And that divide was sort of what resembled what was going on in the country at the time, where people stood on opposite ends of the war and what was happening, how the world all of a sudden was just sort of upside down back then. Great things, crazy things. And I wanted to capture that basically because it was my era. It was growing up at that time, trying to know a woman's place in the world at that time, women's liberation, and for men who were going through the difficulty of a war and a draft lottery, and what that was like for them to just have a number picked out almost like out of a hat. And if that is your birthday, you're shipped off to Vietnam.
Right.
So I really wanted to just explore that era in a lot more detail, and have it for people who have lived through it, and honoring those in the military who have lived through that, and for future generations to come to just sort of embrace a part of our history. We're made up of what was before us, and I feel it's like really important to share that.
Absolutely. Well, there's so many insights to be gained from that. I mean, the 60s, you hear the 60s, and especially those who are part of my generation who were raised by parents from that generation or have older siblings who were born like in 68. We're familiar with it because we know it was like the world from this, I don't know. It's like if you take a pot of water that's peaceful and then you put some heat and it goes to this roiling, boiling, bubbling brew. And that's what I think of when I think of the 60s. Like things went from calm to bubble, 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 just
You got it. You nailed
craziness.
it. Yeah, you nailed it. And what a difficult time to be coming of age. Women in one way, as I mentioned, they were trying to find their place in the world. Men, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's going to happen to me? At so young an age, 18 years old, at so young an age, life, they could just be uprooted and go into a conflict that is really frightening. And as a psychologist, I specialize in working with that generation,
Yes.
and the Vietnam War era. And so I have a cousin who went there, which is also part of the book, and what it was like for them when they came home, because it wasn't like your daddy's war, World War II, World War One. You're heroes, rah rah. We just wanted to honor you, ticker tape parades. Not in the Vietnam War. And they struggled as much with that, with coming home and the way they were treated, as they did with the symptoms of what they saw when they were in combat. And I would hear that all the time. Boy, the combat was tough. But boy, coming home and getting the treatment that we got, not all of them, but the majority of them really had a hard time. They're labeled, they're not talked to, they're treated horribly, they had difficulty getting jobs. There was just so much there that they had to carry with them. And they were still young. They were still young adults when they were doing this. So I had to honor
Absolutely.
their voices. I just had to.
Yeah, well, rightly so, because, they had to come home to, such a negative situation. You made me think. I've watched too many Elvis movies in my life, being raised by my parents. But I remember this Elvis movie, and it was like after World War II, and talking about the GI Bill says, "Yeah, I come home, I get the same job." And I don't think there was such a thing for the Vietnam veterans, was there? I mean, that's why there was such
I,
difficulty. They didn't have that guarantee of employment when they came home.
I
Or
think it
am I
was definitely
mistaken?
much harder. Maybe some did, but they were looked at differently in a couple of different ways because they were called horrendous names and had so much happen to them that they were looked at as being bad and and horrible for the things that they did because for the first time ever, war is televised on TV. So we not only saw our troops fighting for our safety, we saw what
Hmm.
was happening to the Vietnamese people. And
Right.
we really look like the bad guy. And many will say that we were the bad guy.
Yeah.
So you're looked at, you're the enemy. So all of a sudden you're the enemy. And they think that because of the symptoms Vietnam vets suffered, we still didn't have PTSD diagnosed yet. That didn't happen
Right.
yet.
Right.
And so behaviors which were normal for being in such a tough circumstance were looked at as if, oh, something the matter with these guys. I don't want to hire these people. I don't want to hire them.
So they
So
were
they had to
penalized on
face that
every
as well.
count. They were penalized by, first of
Yeah.
all, being drafted, even though that was not their wish. And then they had to endure that
Hmm.
and then come home and endure some more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very rough. And then even when they tried to seek help, the VA was pretty much, well, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Come on. But that's what vets in other wars did.
Right.
And they couldn't. It was different. And it took Vietnam vets and all their symptoms to be researched and studied enough to come up with a diagnosis of PTSD. And
Right.
I actually end the book when the PTSD is given and is seen as an official diagnosis by the medical community. So
Yeah, it's
so
sad that
it
it
comes
takes so
right to that.
much. Yeah. And it's just sad that it took so much to get to that point where they recognized it as a true issue beyond that person's control.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. The book also covers the woman's name is Kate in there, covers Kate's father who had, there were symptoms. There was stuff that's underlying there, and there's some symptoms that you see happening, and but don't talk about it. We know there's something there, and Kate's seeing something, but she's not quite sure what it is because it's kept under
Right.
there. And it was, I think, harder for vets returning to keep a lot of that down. They tried to suppress as much as possible, but families could tell. People know it's different. I did a lot of work with families of veterans as well to help them understand what these symptoms are, why your loved one is acting the way that they're acting. He or she is acting because of what they did experience. And I am talking female too, because even though women were there, they supposedly were in combat. They were in combat areas. They saw a lot. They dealt with a lot. It was harder for them to even be, oh, you're not in a combat zone, therefore you do not have, and you can't have these symptoms. It's like, yes, you can. So
Right.
for the loved ones to come home and suffer, and everybody wondering what are we seeing, and how is this acted out? So we're doing better, I think, now recognizing it and treating it many years. I mean, many years after they've come home.
Absolutely. Well, and you and I had talked before during our pre-interview about the trickle-down effect. Someone faces these trauma and they're doing their best to hold themselves together, but it's still leaking out in their behavior to the family, which then affects those, children that they're raising, the spouse, and it, can continue on for several generations. And you may not recognize why you're behaving the way you are until you trace it back.
Exactly. And I even know the things that I do because of my father in the World War II. His attention to detail and timing and being early for everything, and and that's just the little things. The other things that families might be seeing. Yeah, it is multi-generation. It doesn't just stop at that generation. You see everything that can come through a family that's gone through. It becomes a through the generations. Exactly. And they're living it, and the kids will note that.
Absolutely. So, I when I think of trauma, I know we can also have traumatic things happen to us right here in the States, whether it's, maybe experiencing some form of violence or some kind of emotional trauma that's not necessarily violent, but still hurtful. And so I wonder, like when these veterans did come home, you know, if there were any who had that type of experience who were able to relate to them early on, or if that was maybe part of what led to that diagnosis of the PTSD, that understanding based on events at home. Or maybe that's too broad of a question.
Okay. I'll see if I can get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also too, people could have even gone into the service, and we all have our stuff, so we might even be dealing with other issues from the past as well. And if there was any type of issues before that, we bring those with us. So it could be seen even more so. And the hard part is civilians understanding what we're seeing. Their vets are protective of us because they want to keep us safe. And the families, they would say, I don't want my kid to go here. I don't want my kid to go here. And you see that also in the Iraq and Afghanistan vets and the younger ones too. Don't go down these roads, or wait a minute, 4th of July, I don't see any of those fireworks or anything that. So you catch all of that trauma, all of those, and if it's not full blown PTSD, you can still have some of those symptoms. You can still have some of those traits that you're dealing with. And they want to just protect and hold the family so tight. And the wife or the husband, the kids saying, hey, come on, let us breathe. But they're doing it out of that desire to protect. And it's really important when I work with the families to help them understand that. And for the veteran to try to you got to let go a little bit. You got to let folks breathe. You got to let them go. And they'll say, but I saw this. I saw, yeah. But you can't keep everybody in a bubble. I think I have one vet once to tell me, can I just keep my family in a bubble? Just let me keep them in a bubble. And when you think of that, okay, when you think of what it takes for somebody to get to the point of having to think they need to keep their family in the bubble, it's been hard. It's been tough.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, my mind also goes to the entertainment industry and their portrayal of those times. I think of shows like I grew up watching MASH. In more recent years,
Oh,
This Is Us. But MASH, even though it was set in
yes,
Korea, it was
yes,
kind of basically about Vietnam and the whole, you
yes, it
know,
was.
humor. So, I wonder how that affects people's viewpoint of those times and of those, those who were coming back struggling. I'd be curious for your opinion about that, about the entertainment side of things.
I yeah, I think that the more that we can see played realistically out, and I think both shows did a good job, and they're two of my favorite shows too.
They are
Um,
good shows.
the more, aren't they? Oh gosh, yeah. The more people can get a sense of what was going on. It took MASH a while, if I recall. They would have the doctors in the operating room and they couldn't have blood on them. So
Oh,
I
I
think it
didn't
took them a
pick up
little
on
while before
that.
they, yeah, I believe that it took them a while before they allowed it to be seen for what was really happening.
Yeah,
Uh, and it was like, okay, we're going to face the reality. We're going to show what it really was.
right.
And I think that is real. And we need to see that. We need to see what that
Yeah,
was like. And this is us who had a great way of doing their flashbacks and I can't remember the character's name, but his dealing with what he was dealing with. And wasn't there a brother, I think, too, who was served? And we just
yeah,
saw what he went through. And I think they went back to Vietnam. But
yeah. They
yeah,
did.
so you're really opening the doors for civilians to get an idea of what
Yeah,
happened then, especially when it seems to, and then veterans can say this was not portrayed accurately, that could not be portrayed accurately. But I could not tell you, I was not there, except that I'm
yeah.
sure they did their best
Oh,
to
I'm sure.
try, both of those shows did their best, I think, to portray the accuracy and the emotional levels
I would
of what
agree with
people are
that,
feeling. I
especially
think they
toward
did
the end
that
of
very,
Mash. I believe there was an
oh,
episode where like they were under fire, they were genuinely afraid, and it's just that one episode that I specifically remember being that way. Otherwise, it was mostly them joking around with each other, which was the appeal. But I
yeah.
do remember their at least an episode or two where their life was portrayed as being in danger, which gave that sense of reality to that.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Yeah,
and then
and there
with
was
This
an
Is Us
episode where a
also.
psychiatrist. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
No,
I was
no,
going to say there
I'm
was an episode of the no episode with the psychiatrist that came in. Sigmund. I don't know what his real name was, but they kind of called him and he talked to them. And actually, from what I read, he let the director let them just improvise their answers, if I recall, and you could see the emotional depth that the actors got into
yeah,
with that. And the joking. I'm one who I like humor and pathos mixed together. I like a mix of that because sometimes the best way to deal with a lot of the hurt and the pain is through humor. So I write that a lot. My co-author and I very much use humor, not laughing at what happens, but looking at the situation and where our coping skills sometimes need that humor
right.
to uplift us and get us through. So I thought
Yes.
that that show did a great job of bringing it to that level of, man, we see all of this, boy, we just got to lighten this up whenever we can, and they did a beautiful job
They
doing that.
really did.
And
They
he's
really
been
did.
Larry Gelbart. He was one of my favorite writers too, so I really appreciated it.
Absolutely. So I think maybe you had mentioned about your cousins. We touched on them. Did you want to share more about like the opposite extremes they went into? You mentioned one cousin going off into war, but
Yeah,
60s being a very volatile, crazy time and going off in different directions like that.
yeah, and especially as I said, they were close. They were raised very, very closely together, and he always had that interest. It was basically he was born with combat boots on. And because he came out of the idealized movies of World War II and seeing Kate's dad's medals all over and everything, and you were going to grow up and you were going to be a hero. And of course, you went off to war, and which my father did at the age of 17. And all of that took place in there was real. And in the book, there is a Bible that my dad carried
Right.
and actually the story starts off with the first line is my dad was shot in the Bible, and dad was
Yes.
shot in the Bible. He had the Bible in his breast pocket, and the bullet saved his life. The Bible
The
saved his
Bible
life. The
saved his
bullet did not
life.
go all the way through. The
Right.
Bible saved his life. So Albie was like, wow, it's magic. Yeah, I'm going to be a hero too. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a hero too, and I'm going to fight. Um, and the kids are so close. He sees himself as a protector, the male role, sees himself as the protector as a kid. And they get older, and you realize that because it was the Vietnam War, they really struggled on. She could not understand his point of view of wanting to serve. And he could not understand why she was protesting because you do this for your country. You do this. And so it was that, no, I'm right. No, I'm right. So a moral righteousness that both of them had. He also didn't like her kind of hippie style, her ways, and she was just trying to figure out who she is. Albie always knew what he wanted in life. She didn't have a clue. She wanted to be a waitress in a Greenwich Village cafe and listen to Joan Baez on the radio and just wear groovy clothes. And he stayed more kind of tight and a bit more rigid. So they also confronted some of those cultural norms. She was breaking free and he was holding it together. So they really struggled. They really struggled. And Albie also had a girlfriend, Joanne, whose brother was killed in the war. So that even made it harder for him to go and serve. But he was duty and country. I love my girlfriend, but and I know this hurts, but this is what I need to do.
Right.
And I would meet some vets at times too who had friends who went over and served or got drafted. And at the time, they might have enlisted because they wanted to be there also too for their friends. There were people that enlisted on the buddy system too. They did that.
Oh,
They wanted to be
okay.
there to support their buddies too. So you saw a lot of a buddy system approach, and that also happens to the book. Albie and a friend tries to go in onto a buddy system. So you catch that too. You catch vets telling me that they want to go in together and they want to take care of each other. And it was about the war, but it was also about being there for each other because that's who they also had to protect.
Sure. So someone
So
would
you
be
call,
drafted, and so their buddy would go to watch their back. Is that kind of how that
but
was?
yeah, or they would enlist, or they would actually enlist together under a buddy system. And a lot more people actually enlisted than did get drafted. Well, the war started in the 50s, but a lot of them would go in together. And then if they did that, they were able to kind of choose where they wanted to, what kind of roles they might want to be. They might not have wanted the front lines. Albie wanted the front lines. And as it turned out, the real Albie, my cousin, really did. Well, he did enlist, and he did end up on the front lines, infantry, and that's what he wanted. He didn't want to. He didn't want to go to college first. His number was high, so he didn't have to go in. Only it was all decided by your birth dates, and if you weren't the first 100, what was it, maybe 185, 95 were chosen, but he still chose to go in because a friend got drafted, and he
Ah,
had to go in again to respect that friend and honor that friend.
I see. And
So
was the
it's
friend
interesting
also
to
in
hear
the
Beth's
infantry?
stories.
Was his friend
Yes,
also in the
he actually
infantry?
did. He
Okay.
was drafted. Yeah, yes. They obviously couldn't catch up with each other, but the friend got injured, and that hurt him really. And he just said, "I have to go in. I have to go in."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And
Wow.
and the stories are based on real vets, and that were more than willing to tell me their stories.
Absolutely.
And
So
I,
then
I
is
respect
this
that, and I really honor that.
a collection of stories throughout the book then? Is it like a collection of stories, or is just a blending of the stories together to form a story?
Yeah, it's a blending. So
Okay.
as we go through the book, what happens is Kate starts meeting different veterans as we go through the book. A friend and a veteran are writing a play about Vietnam. And
Ah,
Kate is a typist. She works as a typist in New York. And she gets to transcribe the interviews from veterans and starts hearing veteran stories.
I
And that's how
see.
she gets familiar. So I was able to use that as a technique to
Yeah.
get their stories told,
Okay. It kind of makes
which
me
was
think
really
of The
cool.
Help.
Yeah.
About how they kind of
Oh,
pulled the stories
yeah,
together
yeah,
that
yeah,
way with The Help, and I like
yeah,
that. It's a good
yeah.
approach.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely worked and opened her eyes from someone coming from the opposite end of the spectrum because she never was upset at the people who served. She was mad at the war and the government being putting them in the war. But unfortunately, it got so confused, I think, with the protesters because the protesters became mad not just at the government putting them people in this position. It was mad at the veterans and those serving there too. So it all got roughly entangled in a way it hadn't before.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how things can get really extremely heated under the right circumstances, the right magnifying glass, so to speak. Just like during COVID, the whole thing
Yeah,
about masks, something that any other time might have been a simple thing and it became very political. And
yeah,
what do you do with that? So,
yeah.
just it's all about
And
how things are
it's
framed
tough.
sometimes.
It really is. It really is. And it makes it so difficult because with that being framed in certain ways, you have one side and you have the other side. And where we had an ability in the past to say, you have a point of view, and it might be different my point of view, but I respect your point of view.
Yeah,
Now, and even in Vietnam, we during that era a little bit too. Um, no, I'm right and you're wrong. And and that's where the hard part is. And so you have people who are no longer connected
right,
because of that. You have family and friends not talking to each other anymore
right,
because this side is right, this is it. It's not just a simple you're different, and in terms of what you believe, it's oh well, I can't talk to you anymore,
right.
and that is so sad.
It is. You know, it's probably the way my crazy mind works, but my thinking went to the Hatfield and the McCoys. As you were
Yeah,
explaining that, it's like the modern day
right.
Hatfield and McCoys.
Yeah, yeah. It's divided. It's divided. And the purpose of the book was to try to explore that is love greater than that? Is love greater than what are differing beliefs systems?
Yeah, that is an
Can
excellent
we
question.
get past that? So that through line plays in the book because I mean, they start fighting and you don't know if they're going to be able to resolve anything again and that was the main through line to get to that is our strength that who we are more important than the fact that we just happen to believe different things and can we still respect each other and care
Yeah,
about each other despite that. It's tough. And it so resembles right now. I mean, it was incredible writing that because it's just so close to where we are now.
absolutely. When you were doing the research and the writing for this, did any parts really, I don't know, speak to your heart, or did you struggle through certain parts as you were going through that?
Yeah, I did struggle, and not to give away the the
Oh,
ending. I
yeah.
did struggle, but there was one character who I didn't want to write something about this character. I didn't want to write something. I didn't want to write it. And I was taking a walk one day, and well, theater background, I tend to talk to my characters or I turn into my characters, which often can be interesting to see me walking down the street and trying to adapt some kind of crazy position or
I'd like to
whatever.
be a fly on the
But
wall
I
with
was,
that.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I have a rural area, so not many people see me. But so I've always done that acting background. And the character said, "Pat, you got to write it. You got to write it. You got to say this. You've got to bring the story to this point." And it wasn't until that point did the novel really become a novel. And the interesting thing about it is what I was telling was the person's true story. I just didn't want to because it was
Yeah,
hard. So that was the hardest thing, but I realized that I had to do it. I had to do it. And I had to honor the story. But it was very hard to do. Very hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you feel like maybe you changed in any way as you wrote this? Maybe did it help you heal in any possible way? I know that you weren't directly affected as far as the war, but you were still affected by things that happened to our families. So I'm just
Oh
curious.
yeah, yeah. And I think one of the hardest parts that hit me is my family's all gone now. And my parents, my grandmother are very big. The family's very rooted. And they were my parents and they were my grandma and my cousin. And when I wrote the story, they were back in life for me. They were real. They were with me. I went through this intense grieving process when the book ended because I had to say goodbye again. And that was very, very hard. I'm like, what's wrong with me? And I couldn't figure out at first what's wrong with me. Here I am, a therapist, trying to figure out what am I grieving? Just, and I was grieving the fact that I had my family right there with me. I could write them and they were right with me. And then I had to say goodbye. And that was very, very rough. I mean, they're here and they're in the book, and I can honor them through that. But that
Yeah.
was really hard. And I had no idea that was going to happen. I couldn't have planned for that at all.
That is amazing how that happens. We do get so attached to the people we write about, whether it's a real person or sometimes even our fictional people, because they're real to us
Yes,
up here. You know, they've
yes,
got a
yes,
whole
very
life
much.
and ecosystem going.
Yeah, yeah, they really do. They really
Yeah,
do. So that was tough.
yeah. Was this the first book you've written, or have you written other books?
No,
I forgot to ask you that.
my first book was about a child and her mother during the Holocaust.
Okay.
And that book, The Crystal Beads, Lalka's Journey, was told to me as just a story about a young girl whose mother took her to a church and a convent school to keep her safe during the Holocaust. And
Okay.
I wrote it as a short story, and it then turned into a children's book with an
Okay.
illustrator who was the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was, yeah, that was just, I got so lucky. She lives in Israel, and she was from Russia, and I was so happy to have her because she knew firsthand what it was like for her
Absolutely. You
grandfather.
couldn't ask for a better partner to work with in that
No,
particular story.
yeah.
Wow.
And as it turned out, her grandfather was still alive during the writing of this. And Katja is the illustrator's name. And I asked her if she would ask her grandfather to tell his story so we could put it in the afterword of the book. So we could have a Holocaust survivor actually tell the story, his own story. And he did. So we had
Wow.
that included in the back of the book. So I was really happy to have
Amazing.
that.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, just to have a real life story shared. What a bonus for the people reading that book, and what a great thing to just have someone trust you to include that in your book. That's so wonderful that he was willing to do that.
Yeah.
I assume it's a he.
Yeah.
I made an assumption there, but
Yeah.
um,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it was tough because neither Katja or her grandfather speaks English. So we had to go through these layers of translation and to get it to English, from Russian to Hebrew to English, and move that in there. But it was worth it. It was worth it. It was worth it.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, another one from my reading list.
Ah,
I'm
it's
gonna have to make
beautifully
sure to
illustrated.
illustrations are welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you? We're getting fairly close. We're not quite
Yeah.
to the end, but do you have plans for any additional books? Maybe circling back to more of your family, maybe bringing them back for another storyline altogether.
I'm playing around with a couple of different ideas. There's a few things. Being a playwright, one of the ideas is I turned the kids' book into a stage production and had music and dance incorporated into it, which was nice. There are some great scenes in this book that I would love to see move into a play.
Okay.
Um, into all the broken angels. I'm playing around with moving into the later 70s, not Kate's story necessarily, but a bit more into some of the women's movements and still women finding their voice at that time. It's still in the very early stages, but I'd like to explore that a bit and see where that goes.
I like the
Um,
sound of it. Kind
yeah,
of a book
yeah,
version of
it's
9 to 5, right?
a kind of yeah no, and it really is in the crazy work world of how women were treated back
Hmm.
then, what we dealt with. So there is that there's even some of that in Kate's world and all the broken angels, but I kind of want to expand on that more.
I like the sound of it. I'll
So
be
see what
very
happens.
curious for
Yeah.
that book. If you put it out there, I definitely want to know about it.
Okay. Okay.
Because I mean, that's basically you know the time I came into the world and
Ah,
got to see and hear. I had a stay-at-home mom that until our budget kind of in the 80s kind of became troublesome. Then she had to find little part-time jobs to help. But at the end of the day, she was still mostly stay-at-home mom. But those were those times that I grew up in. So I'll be very
yeah.
curious to hear about just the adult perspective compared to my childhood
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. It should be fun. I started playing around with it, just seeing where it's going to go. So it should be interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for those who are interested in finding your book, where can they find it?
I'm on Amazon in the US and the UK and on limited Kindle Unlimited right now, and there's even a sale price for the ebook, right? So people can look on there. But any retail, any online store that sells books, you're able to find me
Okay.
on there.
Excellent.
You could check out my website, and the links are on there as well. I'm also on Instagram under my author, Pat Black-Gould author, LinkedIn, Facebook. So feel free to drop me a line or say hi.
Sounds good. Now, I not I was hoping to have a fresh question, but I'm going to use a question that I do have on hand. Let me explain a little bit. So, a friend of mine had me watch someone else's podcast, and he did something really cool. And I thought, I'm going to start doing that on my podcast. And what he would do is ask his current guest to come up with a question for a future guest. So I have a question from a previous guest. I did ask the last person I
Okay.
interviewed the same question, and she's supposed to get back to me, but she hasn't yet. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the previous guest. So let me find this question here. Let me see if I got it in my notes. I have a notebook full of here it is.
This is a cool idea. I love it. What a great
Right?
idea. That was
I was like,
fun.
oh, I
Yeah.
have to borrow this. So this is the question
Love
he
it.
asked. How important is love in dealing with your grief?
Ooh, the more you love, the more you grieve. So it's a question of understanding that love will stay with you. The person may be gone. And it was like finishing my book. All that love for this family that I wrote and embraced them so tight again. I had to grieve. They're leaving, but I'm holding them and I'm passing them on to other family members and keeping their stories alive and honoring them. So it's a big part of it. It's a big part of it because I'm them. I'm that part of them. So they will stay with me forever. So the grief is rough, but the love is stronger and the memories of all that are stronger, which is why I brought them back to life.
I love that. It's nice to take out the memories of them, like kind of almost like going through a mental photo album. Just
I like that.
pulling out
I like
favorite
that.
memories. Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Feel free to
Yeah.
borrow it.
Okay. Sure. Uh-huh. Hmm.
But we do that, don't we? We sometimes something will happen in our lives that makes us remember a moment, and we pull that moment out and we hold on to it. We look and we remember those details. I mean, it really is. It's like really examining a photo of just that wonderful memory.
And
So,
it's so important to do that, I think, with our culture, where we always look to the future, where it's very hard for us to say it's okay. So you just go past it. Okay, they're gone. They're not here. There's, that respect for those we lost. I don't know. I think for some folks and maybe some nationalities it's strong, but I'm not sure it's always that strong for everybody. And I think it's so important to do that. And my husband's very good about that. He is so sweet. He will have memories and he'll have pictures and things on the phone. And if memory comes up with someone, it'll be there. We once went to my dad's restaurant, and after he had passed, and what we did is we put a cup of coffee in a place setting at the table so he could share that with us. Uh, and when we got married, we had a picture of my parents and his parents in seats
oh,
that were there and set up,
yeah,
so that they can stay with us.
that's so nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
you know, we do. We just I get the idea of moving forward from the pain of the loss, and you know, we have to do that to some extent. But when our heart is healed enough, I do think it's important to go back and think about their qualities and compare it to our lives and what can we learn from them? What can we learn from their parents? And what can we use then to pass down to future generations? Because it's so easy to get
exactly.
lost in the history gets lost if you don't remember it.
Exactly, exactly. And that's very important. And grandma talks about that in the book a lot too. That's really important because she came from another country and that country is gone, and for in her life, and we're American, and especially back then. And then my
Yeah,
father would say that a lot, especially back then, you are from America. You don't, there's no place past that.
right.
Um,
But that's how
so
you lose your heritage in the
that's
process.
right, right. And now we have different things that connect us back to our lineage, DNA tests and everything now. That's more bigger now than it was in the past. So we've opened that door to that. But back then it was very much American.
And I would
Um,
agree with that.
mhm.
While my dad was still alive, I had this point. I had what I called homesick projects. So I would do things whenever I was feeling homesick that would be a distraction. And one of
Oh,
those was going through what's that one with the little tree? I can't remember, but it was the whole lineage following
oh yeah, okay, yeah.
ancestry.com.
Ancestry. Yeah,
It was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is
Uh-huh,
that one?
uh-huh.
And I
Yeah.
had been like, where did our family come from? We're all from Northwest Indiana, but where were we before then? And,
Hmm.
my dad was like, I don't know. And my grandmother wasn't around to ask. She was long gone. And it was like,
Yeah,
okay, well, let's
yeah.
try to figure this out. And, we eventually did figure out the lineage, but it was just like, why? Why is this not common knowledge in our family? And I think you just explained it because of that mindset
Hmm.
that we are Americans, you know. So, and
American.
maybe that's what they
There's a
needed.
lot of that covered in the book about the past. Yeah, and they back then it seemed like it did, but grandma's culture, she had a rich history. We didn't know about the dad's history. Like my parents, I knew more on his, not as much on his side as I did my grandmother's side because she lived with us too. So I got a lot of the information, and so we kind of cover that we lose that when we don't really explore or don't get the answers because I'm writing this and I want to get answers, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You came on the ship that rescued the Titanic. It wasn't the same time, but it was a different time period.
But
But well, tell me
yeah, but
about that. And
still,
I'm like,
yeah.
wow, what was that like? What was it like to be a 16 coming up? 16-year-old not speaking English and coming here. And I only had little bits of answers. And so I could fill in the gaps, but we forget to ask. I think the other part is we think they'll always be here and we'll always be able to get these answers. And
too.
then they're not there. And we try to piece it together.
And so we wish we could do time travel. The Trekkie in me is like,
Oh,
let's go back in
totally.
time.
Totally, totally. I have so many questions, so many questions.
Right? If only. And if we could be eyewitnesses to it, like, oh, that's what oh, look
Ah,
at
I
that.
love it.
I would have done that
Right?
differently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree.
Um, so before we end the show, and we are to the end of it, do you have a favorite saying or just some general advice you would love to share with our audience?
I think that, writing this book from a perspective of family and multi-generational, I would just say, look, and look to your families, ask the questions of them that you might not have been able to ask before. Because if you ever choose to be an author, a writer, whatever, we always pull parts of who we are with us. Almost, I think, almost any genre. I was thinking about that today. It could be sci-fi, it could be something, but they're still rooted in us, right? So
Absolutely.
fill in the information and gaps. Doesn't matter even what the questions are. Fill that in, because one day you're going to want to ask that, and they're not there to answer.
Absolutely
So
right.
try to fill in those gaps. Fill in who you are through them with those questions.
I love that. That is wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful advice. That's beautiful.
well,
And
thank you.
so, on that note, we will thank you for coming today. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Pat as much as I did. Be sure to check out her website, Pat Black-Gould, said it right this time, .com.
Mhm.
And, check out her book. I'm sure going to put it on my list to check out. So thank you. And be sure to like, comment, share our video, okay? Have a good day.
Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.